Hello. Welcome to CyberBible 2.0, the online Bible study of the Gospel according to Luke, sponsored by Union United Methodist Church of Quincy, Illinois. I'm Bob Morwell, the pastor. In this episode, we will take up at the beginning of chapter 6 of the Gospel. The fourth commandment instructs Israel, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it." The Sabbath was defined as the period from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. It was to be a time of rest and worship. It was also one of the ways that the people remembered and celebrated how God had liberated the Hebrew slaves from Egypt. Slaves didn't get a day off, at least not a regularly scheduled day off. That was one mark of a free person, some leisure time. Ironically, it would become in some ways a rather oppressive celebration of liberation. The problem centered around how work was to be defined. What constituted so much work as to be a violation of the Sabbath and the commandment's injunction not to do any work? Elaborate routines were established to avoid many typical chores. Water was drawn and cooking and cleaning were done in advance so that they didn't have to be done on the Sabbath. There were even rules concerning how far it was appropriate to walk on that day. Wealthier Jews could even hire Gentiles to come in and do some of their work for them on the Sabbath. Today, in many Orthodox Jewish homes, you have a lot of appliances that are set on timers to automatically do stuff on the holy day. Sabbath observation was also something which set the Jewish people apart from the Gentiles, and was seen as a way of preserving their religious and cultural identity. To fail to properly observe the Sabbath was to be seen as a lazy form of selling out to the surrounding and hostile pagan world. And so it was that many Pharisees were real sticklers on this point. In one incident, Jesus' disciples get hungry and pick some grains of wheat and rub them between their hands to shuck off the outer hulls. This was considered work and thus improper. Some Pharisees had a hissy fit over this. Now, it's quite possible that this was one of those activities of which different Pharisees disagreed, some calling it work and others not being so bothered by it. Jesus and his friends, which include a number of people whom the Pharisees already regard as sinners, apparently ran afoul of some of the more hard-nosed types. Jesus responds that even the great David had, during a period when he and his followers were on the run from King Saul, who was trying to assassinate him, had taken consecrated bread from the altar of the temple and shared it with his famished men. Essentially, they would have enough strength to keep running for their lives. He then declares, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Now, it's worth noting that Luke gets this story from Mark, who first reports it. Mark includes another quote which Luke omits for some reason. Mark reports that Jesus says the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. Another way to say it would be, the Sabbath was meant to bless people, not for people to bless it. In other words, its original intent has been lost in a legalistic effort to please a God whom the more uptight Pharisees see as a kind of cranky cosmic potentate, demanding they follow all sorts of ever more complex and burdensome rules or face punishment. Jesus isn't saying that just anything goes on the Sabbath, but that it should be seen as a time for people to find comfort and inspiration in their relationship with the same God who freed their ancestors from tyranny and hopelessness. All the rigid rules meant to honor the Sabbath have drained it of its liberating joy and gratitude to God. This is a constant struggle in life, to find rules that give meaningful and positive structure to our days without turning them into oppressive edicts that rob our lives of happiness and freedom. Jesus seeks to temper those rules with a measure of grace. He does not simply ignore or arbitrarily overthrow them and institute some kind of gleeful but ultimately destructive anarchy. In our own culture, we used to have the so-called blue laws that forbade most commerce on Sunday. Those laws have been scrapped because folks want to be able to shop for pretty much anything on any day. Okay, that's not entirely bad, but at the same time, it's led to many people having less free time and a pace of life that can be killingly hectic. A proper balance is hard to strike. Jesus didn't seek to overthrow honoring the Sabbath, but to temper it with some joy and grace. He realizes this is, in his time to be sure, a radical concept, and it then claims a radical authority. Using a title which he would use to commonly refer to himself, he says, "The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." The term Son of Man is rather ambiguous, and perhaps intentionally so. In the Old Testament, you have references in the Psalms and writings of the prophets which indicate that the term simply means a mortal human. In the 56th chapter of Isaiah, there's a passage which uses the term in the context of keeping the Sabbath. This is what the Lord says: "Maintain justice and do what is right, for my salvation is close at hand, and my righteousness will soon be revealed. Blessed is the one who does this, the person who holds it fast, who keeps the Sabbath without desecrating it, and keeps his hands from doing any evil." That comes from the New International Version of the Bible, but it's worth noting that the term it simply translates as "the person" was originally the Hebrew Ben Adam, which means son of man. In this passage, Isaiah is insisting that the most important way to honor the Sabbath is to maintain justice and do what is right. Throughout the book of Isaiah, there's a strong insistence on living out justice and practicing compassion, and that these are vastly more important to God than focusing on ritual and regulations. Jesus echoes this message frequently. In the first three Gospels, Jesus is depicted as never referring to himself as the Son of God. In fact, the closest he comes is in answering the high priest Caiaphas, who asks him at his trial if he is, quote, "the Son of the Blessed." The Gospel of John has Jesus frequently calling himself the Son of God, but frankly there are biblical scholars who doubt that he did so, or at least did so very often, or in public. Why was this? And why does John take a different track? I think it's likely that Jesus did avoid flatly calling himself the Son of God in public. For one thing, to do so was to invite immediate charges of blasphemy and probably quick death by stoning. Not a good strategy for a ministry that's just barely beginning. I had a pastoral counseling professor in seminary who once noted that the difference between Jesus and all sorts of people who claim to be the Messiah or God or some other divine figure is that he did not claim the title for himself. He let others do that, based on their experience of him. I'll have more on this later. I think it's probable that the Gospel of John depicted him as much more comfortable with this title because he was presenting Jesus to a largely pagan culture in which his hesitance to claim a divine status would not have been so well understood. They just didn't think like monotheistic Jews, and their culture was filled with stories of demigods who were part human, part divine. But in his own time and his own culture, Jesus had to walk a very fine and often treacherous line when it came to describing how he saw himself. He necessarily left room for mystery. He could still find himself in ever-deepening danger, as we will see in the next episode of CyberBible 2.0. I'm Bob Morwell, pastor of Union United Methodist Church in Quincy, Illinois. I invite you to check out our website at www.qumc.org, where you click on Union United Methodist Church, and on our Facebook page, which you find by searching for Union United Methodist Church of Quincy, Illinois. Or better yet, come see us in the real world. Peace.